You think you know this story, but what if everything we believed about it was built on a narrative that's quietly falling apart? Stay with me, because what's about to unfold isn't just about one decision or one person. It's about a pattern that changes how we see the entire family. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. And the truth behind it might explain more than anyone expected. You are here with me right now, exactly where you are supposed to be. Just you and me inside this moment where nothing else matters. And I need you to stay, because what we are about to talk about is not simple, and it is not comfortable, and it is not something that can be understood in pieces. It only makes sense when you see the full picture. Because for a very long time, many of us believed we understood this family. We believed we knew who was standing where, who was holding things together, and who was tearing things apart. And that belief became part of the emotional contract between the show and the audience. But reality television does not survive on truth alone. It survives on perception and repetition and selective framing. And over time, those things blur together until the version we consume feels real, even when it is incomplete. And that is where the danger begins. Because once a narrative is established, it becomes difficult to challenge, especially when viewers have invested years of emotion, empathy, and loyalty into specific people and specific roles. And that is why this conversation matters, because it challenges the idea that there were clear heroes and clear villains, and instead forces us to consider something far more unsettling: the possibility that the system itself encouraged everyone to operate from self-interest while presenting unity as a value. Because when you strip away the music, the editing, and the confessionals, what you are left with are decisions, and decisions tell the truth, even when words do not. And when you start looking closely at those decisions, patterns begin to emerge. Patterns of alignment, patterns of avoidance, and patterns of convenience. And those patterns do not point to a single source of harm. They point to a culture where survival took precedence over solidarity, and where loyalty shifted based on need rather than principle. And that realization hits hard, because it means the pain we witnessed was real, but it also means the responses to that pain were not always rooted in growth or integrity. And that is difficult to accept, because it removes the comfort of moral simplicity. It forces us to hold multiple truths at once: that someone can be hurt and still cause harm, that someone can leave and still carry the same habits that damaged them in the first place, and that someone can speak the language of fairness while making choices driven by urgency and fear. And when fear enters the equation, rationalization follows closely behind, because fear tells us that rules can bend just this once, that boundaries can be crossed just this once, and that trust can be extended again even when history says otherwise. And that is where the tension tightens, because history matters. History informs wisdom, and when wisdom is ignored, consequences repeat. And this is why viewers feel conflicted, because on one hand, there is empathy for loss and instability, and on the other hand, there is an expectation of accountability and growth. And when those two things collide, discomfort follows. And that discomfort is not accidental. It is the result of recognizing that leaving a situation does not automatically undo the conditioning that was learned inside it, because patterns are persistent, and they do not disappear simply because circumstances change. They require conscious effort to break. And when that effort is not visible, questions arise. And those questions do not go away just because they are inconvenient. They linger, and they grow louder, especially when new information surfaces that challenges previously held beliefs. And that is what we are experiencing now, a moment where the story feels unstable, where alliances feel unclear, and where motivations feel layered. And that instability creates suspense, because we do not know where accountability will land, or if it will land at all. And that uncertainty keeps viewers watching, because humans are drawn to unresolved tension. We want closure, we want clarity, and we want to believe that growth is possible. But belief requires evidence, and evidence comes from consistent behavior, not explanations offered after the fact. And that is why every conversation, every decision, and every moment of silence matters, because silence can signal many things. It can signal reflection, it can signal limitation, or it can signal control. And when silence appears around topics that carry financial, emotional, or ethical weight, it invites scrutiny, not because viewers are cruel, but because they are invested. And investment creates expectation, and expectation demands transparency. And that transparency has been part of the contract from the very beginning, because this was never just a family. This was a public narrative, a shared story built over years and supported by audience trust. And when that trust is tested, the response determines whether it is restored or further eroded. And that erosion does not happen all at once. It happens slowly, through moments where accountability feels redirected and responsibility feels diluted. And when that pattern repeats, viewers begin to step back emotionally. And once emotional distance forms, engagement weakens. And that is the silent consequence no one can edit around. Because without emotional investment, the story loses its power. And that is why this moment feels pivotal. Because it is not just about what happened, it is about what happens next, and whether the people involved choose reflection over defense, honesty over convenience, and growth over repetition. Because without those choices, the cycle continues, and the questions remain unanswered. And unanswered questions are what keep tension alive, because tension feeds curiosity, and curiosity keeps people watching, but only for so long before it turns into fatigue and disengagement. And that is the crossroads we are approaching, where the future of the narrative depends not on controlling perception, but on confronting reality. And whether that confrontation will happen remains uncertain. And that uncertainty is exactly why this conversation cannot be rushed or reduced or ignored, because it speaks to something larger than one event. It speaks to the cost of unresolved patterns and the price of avoiding accountability. And the reality that growth is not something you claim, it is something you demonstrate, especially when it is difficult, and especially when the audience is watching. As this story continues unfolding, the pressure only intensifies, because once the audience begins to recognize recurring patterns, it becomes impossible to ignore them. And those patterns do not exist in isolation. They exist within choices, conversations, pauses, and reactions that reveal far more than words ever could. And this is where the emotional gravity deepens, because what we are really watching is not a single disagreement or a single financial decision, but the exposure of a long-standing structure that rewarded compliance, discouraged challenge, and normalized silence when silence served certain outcomes. And when that structure is disrupted, discomfort follows, because disruption threatens stability, even if that stability was flawed. And that is why resistance appears, not always loudly, but subtly, through hesitation, through redirection, and through framing events in ways that minimize responsibility while amplifying justification. And this is not unique to this family. It is a human response to loss of control and fear of consequence. Because when people feel cornered, they often reach for narratives that protect their sense of self, rather than narratives that invite accountability. And that instinct is powerful, especially when identity has been built publicly over many years. Because admitting fault in private is difficult, but admitting fault under public scrutiny feels unbearable. And that is where defensiveness can masquerade as explanation, and where explanation can quietly replace ownership. And viewers sense this, even if they cannot immediately articulate it, because humans are attuned to incongruence. We feel when words and actions do not align, and that feeling creates tension that pulls us deeper into the story, because we are searching for resolution. And when resolution does not come, the mind fills the gap with questions. And those questions keep us watching, waiting, and analyzing, because unresolved narratives activate curiosity and emotional investment. But there is a cost to that strategy, because curiosity eventually turns into skepticism if clarity is continually delayed, and skepticism erodes trust. And once trust erodes, the relationship between audience and story fundamentally changes, because viewers stop suspending disbelief and start scrutinizing intent. And when intent is questioned, every action becomes evidence, and every omission becomes meaningful. And that is where the stakes escalate, because at that point, the narrative is no longer guided by production, it is guided by audience interpretation, and that interpretation cannot be controlled once it takes hold. And this is why moments that might have once passed unnoticed now feel loaded, because the context has shifted, and context changes everything. It changes how silence is perceived, it changes how explanations are weighed, and it changes how motives are inferred. And that shift places immense pressure on those involved, because the margin for ambiguity narrows and the tolerance for deflection diminishes. And that is when the story reaches a critical juncture where transparency becomes the only viable path forward. Not because transparency guarantees forgiveness, but because it preserves credibility. And credibility is the currency that sustains long-running narratives. Without it, even the most compelling drama loses its impact, because audiences are willing to follow flawed people, but they are not willing to follow stories that feel manipulated. And this distinction matters, because manipulation breeds disengagement, and disengagement ends investment, and that outcome benefits no one involved. And yet, choosing transparency requires courage, because it invites criticism and relinquishes control over interpretation. And that loss of control is frightening, especially for those who have relied on narrative framing as protection. But growth often demands surrender, and surrender is uncomfortable because it forces confrontation with choices that may not align with the image one wishes to maintain. And this is where true character is revealed, not in moments of praise, but in moments of pressure, when excuses are easy and accountability is costly. And viewers recognize this intuitively. They may disagree on details, but they agree on one thing: that integrity reveals itself under strain. And when that integrity feels absent, disappointment follows, because disappointment is the shadow of expectation, and expectation was built through years of storytelling that emphasized values, unity, fairness, and mutual respect. And when actions appear to contradict those values, cognitive dissonance emerges, and the mind seeks resolution, either by reevaluating the story or by withdrawing emotionally. And both outcomes carry consequences, because reevaluation leads to criticism, and withdrawal leads to apathy. And apathy is fatal to engagement. And that is why this chapter feels decisive, because it will determine which path the audience chooses, whether they continue to invest critically or disengage entirely. And that choice will be influenced not by editing or explanation, but by consistency. Because consistency signals sincerity, and sincerity rebuilds trust, even in the aftermath of mistakes. But inconsistency deepens doubt, and doubt fractures connection. And once that fracture widens, it becomes increasingly difficult to bridge. And this is not about perfection, it is about coherence. It is about aligning stated values with demonstrated behavior and allowing space for accountability without retaliation or deflection. And whether that alignment will occur remains uncertain, because uncertainty is the defining feature of this moment. And uncertainty keeps the tension alive, because as long as questions remain unanswered, the story remains unresolved. And unresolved stories command attention, but only temporarily, because attention without trust is fragile and cannot be sustained indefinitely. And that reality looms over everything unfolding now, because the future of the narrative depends not on controlling perception, but on confronting truth. And whether that confrontation happens will determine whether this story evolves into one of reflection and growth, or dissolves into one of fragmentation and disbelief. And that choice is unfolding in real time, with every response, every silence, and every decision that follows. And the audience is watching, not just for drama, but for evidence of change. And until that evidence appears, the tension remains suspended, waiting for resolution that has yet to arrive. At the end of it all, this isn't about picking sides. It's about recognizing patterns and asking whether real growth is happening or the same cycles are repeating under new words. The answers matter because silence and avoidance always speak eventually, and how this is handled next will decide whether this story moves toward honesty or finally loses the trust that's held it together for so long.